Welcome back to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. Today, we are going to be looking at privacy boundaries, personal responsibility, and how to talk about your life story. We'll also touch on effective apologies. We're going to be doing all of this with a post titled, Am I the Asshole for Exposing My Brother-in-Law's Shady Past to My Family?
OP says, I'm a 37-year-old female and I come from a close-knit family. I have 2 younger siblings, a 28-year-old brother, and a 27-year-old sister. My sister recently got engaged to my future brother-in-law, who's 23, and they were dating for around a year. We all know him well, and I've always gotten along well with him. He comes from a rough background, but he's always been very polite and charming. He doesn't talk about his own family or his upbringing. My sister said it's a painful topic for him, so no one ever pushed. There was recently a family event in which my future brother-in-law attended. He was quiet during the day. He's normally high energy and sociable, and then he disappeared for a while. When I went outside for some fresh air, I bumped into him. He was emotional and said it was a hard day for him due to negative associations. He ended up offloading some quite shocking things from his past, including that he had a history of very serious drug use, including needles, that he had done sex work and porn with men and women. I felt for him at the time because he was so upset. He was literally crying on my shoulder, but afterwards I felt more and more uncomfortable. I still feel bad for him since he clearly regrets it, but it's very shocking to find out that he has that kind of history, and it does make me feel differently about him. Obviously, I told my husband what my future brother-in-law told me because I didn't feel comfortable keeping it to myself. I also told my sister because I don't know how honest he had been with her, and it could impact her decision to marry him. She was angry and said she was fully aware, and it doesn't make her think less of him. I know others might disagree, but I decided if my sister, my future brother-in-law, weren't going to bring it up, then it was my responsibility to make sure my family had the information they needed to make an informed choice about what kind of relationship they have with him. My parents agreed that it was the right thing to do, and they were grateful. My brother said he could see my point, but didn't think it was my responsibility to share that information. My brother's wife thought I was out of line. When my sister found out I told our family about my future brother-in-law's sketchy past, she was very angry. She's now refusing to speak to me altogether because apparently this has affected my future brother-in-law quite badly. They are no longer engaged because he, quote, thinks he's not good enough for her, and no one in my family has seen him since all of this happened. Obviously, that wasn't my intention, and no one said he isn't good enough. I think it's naive to pretend that you see someone exactly the same way after finding out they're an addict. Whether you like it or not, there are risks that come with that lifestyle, and relapses are common. I'm concerned that my sister will get hurt, and I don't think it's unreasonable for my family to have access to the same information I do, especially when they're inviting him to their homes and their children, etc. Am I the asshole for informing my family about my future brother-in-law's background? This one made me angry. Oh, man. I feel for the brother-in-law on this one.
Why is this one making you angry?
I think, I mean, you know, kind of like my specialty as a therapist is like addiction, and some of that's from like a grassroots kind of point. And I think to decide that somebody else's story is your story to tell because other people aren't as disturbed by it as you are, I think that that is incredibly invasive. And I think she kind of like weaponized his vulnerability. He obviously hadn't shared that before. He selected that moment to disclose that to her. He was kind of strategic about opening up, and she took that upon herself to totally like violate his privacy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I'm connecting more with the future brother-in-law from like a client perspective because I think I have a lot more experience working with clients of this kind of issue. But what were your hot off the dome reactions to this one? Oh man,
I thought she was a bit of a gossip.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, what are you protecting people from against that, man?
And I could see her maybe sharing the news with the sister that's engaged to him because that's obviously relevant to their relationship.
Yeah.
But I'm not going into that conversation with her thinking she didn't already know that information. At the beginning of the post, she had already said he had a rough upbringing and nobody really pushed to learn more. So I'm interpreting that to mean the sister engaged to him already knows his past and just isn't sharing the full details with everyone else.
Yeah, yeah. And I could, he has some pretty high risk, just, intravenous drug use and a prolific sexual past. I can see that being a high risk for, communicable diseases or things like that, where maybe if he'd glazed over it a little bit, where it would be a safety issue. But I think I say the only time that you should really be violating people's privacy if there's health and safety risk, right? So I think that there could have potentially been a risk to the sister if she didn't know that. So I can see that being like, hey, I don't know if he was using protection, whatever, but then I don't think her family is at risk of this person giving them an STD or some kind of communicable diseases, I would imagine. I don't think he indicates that he's like a risk to people, and
Yeah.
I think that if the sister wants to marry somebody who has a past like that, she's taking on the risk of dealing with relapses or other mental health things that could be going on. It's not the family's business to know that about him,
Yeah.
Poor guy. She like shamed him into like breaking off that relationship,
Yes.
Yeah. Especially sexual details like that. That was really vulnerable for him to disclose like his sexual past like that. And that is not, your father-in-law does not need to know that shit about you. It's just not necessary.
I'm not sure it was a conscious choice to share. He was kind of triggered and very emotional, and someone just stumbled upon him and asked him if he was okay, and he just kind of broke.
Yeah, he was like super vulnerable.
Yeah, and so I don't know if he normally would have shared that with her. I think it was just this perfect storm of a day where he was triggered. She found him, asked how he was. She seemed supportive. He had been dating his fiance for a year, so probably knew the OP about that long and felt she was someone safe he could open up to. And he did. And that ended up biting him in the ass.
Yeah, and you're going to be there like comforting him, letting him cry on your shoulder, and then go around. Like if you were uncomfortable, you could say, hey, this is a lot. I can tell that you're really overwhelmed. Like, I don't know if I'm the right person to like talk you through this. Let me go grab my sister.
Yeah.
But to like continue to encourage somebody to divulge those things to you and then turn around and burn them. I can understand her maybe being caught off guard by that. But if something's making you uncomfortable, you need to stop letting someone talk to you about that.
Mm-hmm.
I do operate, and maybe this is just from my family of origin, but I would assume if there's a married couple, I always assume if I tell something to one spouse, the other spouse will find out, because I would never tell a married couple to keep secrets from each other. So, I mean, her telling her husband, I'd be like, okay, that's an assumed thing. That's a big secret to keep to yourself, and your spouse should be that for you.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
No, I go with the same assumption.
Yeah. Okay. So she was okay to tell her husband, I think.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. And one of the benefits of having a partner or significant other, you get to share your burdens with them.
Mm-hmm. And so with the sister, do you think like the level of detail was appropriate, or what do you think would have been most important for her to like know from that?
I think I would go back to health and safety and just say, I bumped into your fiance. He shared these things with me. I imagine you know, but if you don't, I think it's important you do know.
Mm-hmm. And she's 10 years older. Author is 37. Her sister getting married is 27. And there might even be a point of a lecture of like, hey, there's high risk of relapses, even though this is it now, and I could see that maybe being, I don't know that the sister would have been open to that, but I think just, hey, these are my concerns, and I love you and I want you to be well. And I wanted to make sure that this was on the up and up,
Yeah.
I think the sister could have also said, you better not fucking tell anybody about that. You realize that?
I mean, she might have. They said somewhere that upon learning that they weren't going to tell anybody, OP felt it was her responsibility to share that with everyone else.
She did. Yeah.
She also said that when she shared it with her sister was angry, which I thought was an interesting emotion to pop up. So I'm curious how that message was delivered, because I think if we're saying it in a concerned way, typically people are not going to meet that with anger. If you go in and say, oh my God, did you know your fiance is this porn industry needle using recovered addict?
Yeah, that maybe came out really intense.
That would be met with anger, obviously. But if you go in and say, hey, he shared some things that I imagine you know, but I wanted to share that he told me XYZ. And if you ever want to talk, I know these things, so you can talk to me about them.
That would have been way more supportive.
Right?
I wonder if maybe too, like, talking about like, is this a bias or like a boundary, right? And I think the author maybe expected her sister to be like, oh my God, this is outrageous. There's no way I can marry him. But she was like, yeah, bitch, I know. Like, shut your mouth. And I think that she expected her to react away when she didn't. She's like, well, now it's on me to go tell the world, and it's like, I think that she would have, I think for somebody to expect to, or to like accept him like that was kind of hard for her to understand. And so she was like pushing that, and her family responded that way, but I don't think that she would have been open to, I don't know. I think that he kind of had like the nail in the coffin once that conversation ended, when she decided how she felt about that. So say, we both come from a background of like working with people in recovery. How do you talk to clients about sharing their story kind of in general?
I tell them to take it slow and share what feels comfortable. And it's almost like you're testing people's trustworthiness. So you give them a nugget or two, see what they do with that. And if they're supportive or non-judgmental, or it's not getting shared with everybody in the world, they're probably safe, and you can share a few more nuggets with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So for him, he shared all of the nuggets.
All the nuggets came out. It was a 20-piece big chicken just rolling all over the place. Yeah. Oh, poor guy. Yeah, he didn't.
And it wasn't safe. If he had maybe shared, oh, I'm in recovery, and then that got around to the whole family, he would have known, oh, this is not someone I can share like my drug of choice with, that I was working in the sex industry. I can't share any of that with them because it's going to get around to the whole family.
Yeah. So you see like how well are they keeping secrets, keeping your privacy and respecting that before you divulge more.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, I think the brother-in-law was obviously really just like flooded and overwhelmed. So I think if the brother-in-law was my client, I might say, you need to have people who don't know you very well, who are in your support system, who you could have talked to about that. Like if you had to step outside because you were flooded, call, if you're like, in a 12-step, like call a sponsor or somebody else in recovery, or just a person who's neutral. Because I think he obviously seemed to kind of cross a boundary too by being so personal. They obviously didn't have that kind of relationship. So he was probably, lacking a bit in his support system, or maybe in his recovery, that could have gone differently if he'd had a little bit more strategy on maybe how he disclosed things as well.
Or maybe even with his fiance, having some type of code word. So if you're in public and get triggered, you need to be able to communicate that. So there needs to be some type of a look or some type of tap on the shoulder that signals, hey, I'm struggling and I'm triggered and we need to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. Give him like a heads up.
So I think there could have just been more built-in support with his fiance, or maybe his skill was simply to step outside. But I think having the fiance come and check up on him in 10 or 15 minutes, and she's the one stumbling upon him rather than her older sister.
Yeah, totally.
But instead, the older sister came in, got a whole bunch of the information she was just not prepared to have.
Yeah. And I think that that's so important, especially if like you're newer in recovery, to know what your high risk situations are. So if oh man, my family of origin is a shit show, this is going to be a trauma triggering response, to have like a game plan, because then you get kind of caught with your pants down where you're like, oh my gosh, I am in a bad situation now. Or even, if you're, substance abuse and you're going to a wedding that has a open bar, like you have to come in with a plan, if you're going to be in like a high risk situation. So I would like to see for him in the future of having kind of that SOS thing laid out in advance. I'm going to let my fiance know I'm going to step outside. I'll text her after 10 minutes or, whatever it is, as opposed to being a feather in the wind, like during a meltdown. That's not going to go well either.
No.
And can you imagine? I would never want my future father-in-law to know like my past like that. Like that would be like a one-on-one conversation. Like I would never have like a gather the family and listen to my stories of pornography. Like how disrespectful,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think really kind of devalued him as a as a person a little bit. I think she took kind of a high horse. I'm entitled to break his privacy because of his past.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a line in here. She says, I think it's naive to pretend that you see someone exactly the same after finding out they're an addict. Whether you like it or not, there are risks that come with that lifestyle, and relapses are common. So yes, there are lifestyle risks to being an addict, and yes, relapses are common. But in order to relapse, you have to first be in recovery. And they've been dating for over a year, and nobody had an inkling or an idea that he was in recovery. And she referred to them as a close-knit family. So I think this gives some insight into her bias towards addiction in general, because somebody else could come in and be like, wow, over a year and nobody even had an inkling. You must be working really hard on your recovery.
Yeah, and he could have been in recovery for, he's young, 23, but say let's assume he was at least, I hope 18, right? Yeah. He could have been in recovery for years at this point, and.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. We only know they've been together for a year. We don't know how long he's necessarily been in recovery. That's a good point.
Yeah. And I think, anytime you find out something about somebody that's intimate, it's going to impact how you think about them. So I think to say, well, once I have this idea that somebody's an addict, it's like this whole reframing of like how I see them. It's also like you probably need to like educate yourself a little bit about like addiction and what recovery is like and all of those things too, because it's not this cookie cutter thing, Let's say that you were the family, and let's pretend like this family came in for family counseling. Do you think it's is the family entitled to know the past of kind of new in-laws coming in? Is that an essential function for the family to have?
Personally, I would have to say no. I'd say the person marrying the person coming into the family, yes, they should have the full story so they can make an informed decision on what they're signing up for.
Yeah.
Everybody else's simply need to know. And so if he relapsed, I could see that being a relevant time to share. They probably need to know that at that point. The fiance would probably need some additional support during that period of time. But if he was committed and staying in recovery, I really don't see a reason for them to know that information.
Yeah, I would agree. Like he gets to decide that.
Yeah.
Again, that health and safety thing. I agree with that. I think if the author was so disturbed about what the future brother-in-law kind of told her, I think what would have been helpful is to have kind of follow-up conversations. You guys obviously took a big step in your relationship. The level of vulnerability really increased, of being like, hey, I'm gonna be honest with you, I was shocked to hear that, and I have my own ideas of what maybe addiction looks like. And like, I would like to learn more kind of about what has happened between then and now, because I do want my sister to be well and to be happy, to be happy and healthy. So like, tell me kind of what have you done differently now? Because that is kind of nerve-wracking to me a little bit. And I think that she could have had more follow-up conversations with him now that they are on this new level of closeness, as opposed to just jumping the gun and going to the family. If she was that worried, there was other ways to manage that besides just spreading his privacy all over the place, Yeah, it is like it's gossiping. Yeah, that's not constructive,
Yeah.
So, people responded how they needed to respond. They decided that the engagement was going to get called off, and that like rocked his sense of worth entirely. Like he said, I'm not good enough for this family, basically. How would you kind of direct these different participants to go from here?
I think our gossiper, the OP, needs to go on an apology tour.
Oh, apology tour? I haven't heard that term. I like that. You like to go across country like, sorry, everybody, I was a huge bitch. Just say sorry. I love that. Oh, man.
Yeah, so I would just start with the sister's fiance. He for sure deserves the first apology.
Yeah.
Then I would go to my sister and apologize to her. I would apologize to my parents, really just for sharing information that wasn't mine to share, and for whatever adverse effects learning that information had on what they thought about their future son-in-law. And then doing the same with the brother and his wife. And I think the brother and his wife would appreciate the apology because they thought she was in the wrong to share that information in the first place.
Like, you were wrong, so your apology is very invited.
Yes.
Yeah. I just, we talked a little bit about this in previous episodes. How do you teach people to apologize? How do you tell a client the structure of an apology?
Oh, the structure of an apology. I think the first thing is that we keep it focused on ourselves
Okay.
and that we aren't using the other person's behavior in the apology. So I'm sorry I yelled, but you made me mad.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not a real apology. You didn't actually take ownership of anything. You put it all on the other person's behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to keep it focused on us. So we are actually taking ownership and accountability. And that's usually the biggest piece that I communicate to clients. So we're apologizing for our behavior. If our behavior has elicited unwanted emotions from them, we apologize for that. So for example, it might look like, I'm sorry if by me telling everyone you felt really shamed.
Mm-hmm.
That was not my intent.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm sorry I took advantage of your vulnerability and told everybody everything you told me.
Oh, I'm imagining her saying that to him. That'd be so hurtful. Oh man. Yeah. She needs to apologize. I hope she does apologize to him. Yeah. I do it. I guess I kind of, like I like kind of scripts with apologies. I do agree. Like if you're to the point in your processing internally where you feel the need to explain why you did something, you're not ready to apologize. I definitely agree. Like if you're there still defending, or I did this because, you're not at the point. So I also say if you're not ready to stop doing it, you are not ready to apologize. So I say it needs to be very specific. So I say you apologize for the specific action. I imagine that made you feel such and such. I promise that will not happen again. And what can I do to make it right? So I'm really sorry that I told my whole family your story. I imagine that felt so vulnerable and hurtful and shameful. I promise something like that will never happen again. Is there anything I could do to make this right for us? And sometimes they say no. And sometimes they tell you to go fuck yourself. And that's okay too. And like we have to be open to however it is that they want to receive our apology. And I also think sometimes we have to think, am I apologizing for myself or for this other person? And if I'm only apologizing to make myself feel better, and if my apology is going to cause harm to that other person, then I have to do what's called like a living amends, where I have to acknowledge that I'm inclined towards behavior like that and I have to commit to not doing that again to somebody else. So, sometimes if somebody's expressed that they want space or they have boundaries around access, you don't get to apologize and you have to eat that, and you just commit to not doing that again to somebody else, and you wish well for them kind of thing. But yeah, so be specific about the action, anticipate what that must have felt like. Tell them you're not going to do that again, and ask them if there's anything they can do right. And also say, is there anything else that maybe I'm not aware of that I've done to cause harm? Because there might be things, or maybe I anticipate how that made them feel, and I empathize totally inaccurately, and they actually felt this in this way, right? So I want to give them space to for them to share with me how my behavior made them feel too. But that's kind of the formula I like to go by.
That's a good formula. I think people like formulas.
Formulas demystify conversations. And I think it's the best way to learn new skills,
Yeah. Yeah.
When I can tell someone's speaking in a formula, I get very curious, really attuned to it. I'm like, oh, they're really being intentional about how they're speaking to me. They're probably going to say something pretty important. I want to listen to what they're telling me.
Who was talking to you in formulas? Nobody talks to me. And then I'm like, oh, they're using an I statement.
I have some people, because my relationships, I can tell, because I kind of model it, I think, and it shapes over time, where I can tell communication patterns adjust, and I can tell when somebody's being really intentional. Usually during conflict, I think is when I notice it the most. Where I'm somebody's really trying to be really careful in how we speak to each other right now. Yeah. Marriage is a really good time for formulas to come out. Oh man. Or if I speak in formulas and I can tell people are very attentive when they can tell that you're being intentional, If you were the brother-in-law, where might you go from here?
Man, to a meeting.
Call your sponsor. This is some stuff to process for sure.
Yeah, I would be needing a lot of support because I finally found someone who accepted me, accepted my past, loved me, wanted to marry me. Then our whole family turned on me and I ended up breaking it all off. So I'm like primed and at high risk for some self-destructive behavior right about now. So I'm going to be looking for some support.
Yeah. Oh God, how devastating. You know, again, I don't know. It sounds like he's been pretty, he sounds like social and energetic is how she kind of described him. So like, I think that'd be really, really the only way I can see that kind of going back in is to just talk about what happened. If he did decide he wanted to reconcile, to have the family together and be like, these are some things that I would talk to the sister first and be like, that was not fucking cool. Like, if that happens again, we're not going to be able to have a very close relationship. Like, I think you kind of burned me and I'd appreciate privacy going forward. I really trusted you. So I think he's in his right to say something like that, but I think he'd almost have to bring the family together and be like, hey, I realize that you learned some things about me. There's things that I didn't really want to share with you because they were kind of private. I would love to be a part of your family. You know, I care a lot about your daughter and I plan on taking very good care of her. I've come really far in my process and, I'm going to meetings. I have a sponsor. I've not had a relapse and so long, and just kind of give them maybe more insight. But again, I don't think he should have been in that position in the first place. But if they wanted to reconcile, I think that might be kind of the best way to go about that. If that was my client, I'd probably coach him in that way. But poor guy. Yeah. That's he'd have to decide, I guess, on his own comfortability and what kind of relationship he wanted to have with them going forward.
OP is saying she didn't want them to break up. It's written, obviously, that wasn't my intention for them to break up. And no one said he wasn't good enough. I think she did say he wasn't good enough because actions speak louder than words. And her actions are saying, you're not good enough to be in our family. You had over a year of charming, sociable interactions with us, and we enjoyed having you as part of our family. And then we learn these details, and now all of a sudden, we need to be careful inviting you into our homes and leaving our children around you. Yeah, so for her sharing his past for the specific reasons she stated she shared them for, she's essentially saying something has changed, and you are now no longer good enough, and we need to change the way we interact with you.
Yeah, totally.
When he's been the same, his past was always there. They just didn't know about it.
Yeah. She like, it's really important that everyone knows this thing about you so we could all view you in the same way. Especially, talk about re-traumatizing somebody, when she gave the order of operations of his history, she said he had a very serious drug use. He has done sex work and porn. So that obviously escalated, right? You probably escalate through your drug use. Your drug use becomes big. So you start engaging in kind of sexual activities to cover that. Now it escalates to like your professional sex worker. And most people don't come into sex work because things are going well. It's usually the result of trauma and victimization, and so again, if this was like even like a female too, like I think sometimes with men, we tend to minimize sometimes sexual behaviors like that, but like talk about re-traumatizing and like re-victimizing somebody. Like awful to take that level of trauma and destroy somebody's relationship because of that, and yeah, and I just think like best case scenario for him is that he's in recovery and he finds a supportive partner and a family who loves him. Like, why wouldn't you want him to have that?
Yeah.
I think that's just like so shitty, and I think that he was really vulnerable and had been through some like really serious stuff, and she really re-traumatized him. Awful. So is she the asshole for informing her family?
1,000,000%.
Yeah, 100% her bad on that. Yeah. I totally agree.
All right, Jess, summarize this one for us.
Okay. So it's the first thing we kind of learned about, which is privacy in general. So if somebody's disclosing something vulnerable to you that you feel like you cannot handle or respect privacy, you need to let them know that you're not in a position and to redirect them. And if somebody tells a story to you, it is not your part to tell somebody else's story. Right. So there are some times, for health and safety reasons that you might need to violate some privacy, and only the person who's at risk needs to be informed. So in this case, only the sister needed to be spoken to about this situation. If you are in recovery or you have a story that maybe you feel is private, you can start kind of disclosing that by throwing out kind of little breadcrumbs for people, see how they react to that. but know who is safe and not safe to disclose things to. And it's your story. You're allowed to tell whoever you want to or not tell whoever you want to. Apologies. So if you are in a position where you're still trying to defend yourself or justify your behavior, explain yourself, you are not ready to apologize. You should not be saying because, in apologies at all. And if you're new to apologies and wanting to practice taking ownership, a helpful formula could be, I apologize about a very specific behavior. I imagine that made you feel such and such. I promise not to do it again. And is there anything I can do to make it right? Anything I left out there?
Actions speak louder than words.
Actions
Always.
speak louder than words. Yeah, give somebody the opportunity to set a new story for themselves. We all have things that we're not proud about.
Absolutely. All right, guys, that's what we have for you on this one. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts. So send them to us at assertivepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time.